Hello, Shoyan here. This is a new site where I'll be doing an addition and renovation. It's a small area, so nothing needs to be pre-cut. I'll cut the timber myself in my workshop. In this project, I'll be extending the household altar room, just expanding it a bit.
これなんでこんな色ちゃうの？
でこれがほらすり直すまでこれが一回第三の下にこれジャーンと走らせて
じゃあこれ
はそれ
削ったらこれになるの？
おおこれ削ったらこれに
Pre-cutting requires drawing up plans, sending them to the mill for processing, and then dealing with all the back and forth. Since I'll be framing on site, I figured it'd be faster to just mark and cut everything myself. I do want large-sized timber, but since I'll be joining the timber by hand, if it's too heavy, it'll be a real pain. So I'm using dry timber that's right at the limit of what I can lift. Up until about 30 years ago, I used to do all the planing with this electric hand planer. Just for one house, you'd go through about 100 pieces like this. Every day, day in and day out, I was shaping timber with another hand planer. That's when I got my hands on this big electric planer. And now, I only use it once every few years. Feels more like a collector's item these days. But back then, I really used this heavy planer almost every day.
あっちに明かりがあるってことはようわかるやろ
I have to plane with the same precision as a jointer and planer using this electric hand planer. Get it flat, get the edges square, can't have any unevenness. But once you get the hang of it, you can use even this kind of tool pretty smoothly.
で1本
大工が手入れするとこんだけかかるいいの位置からいいの
これ手書きの図面？
あして書くんかい
そういう意味じゃねえ。
Now I'm doing some layout marking. It's been a while. Before that, I checked the wood's quirks to decide the best way to use each piece.
ね、このタイミングに癖を見極めるってこと？
うんっていうか上場下場を見てな荷重に対しては癖を作ったらんと
あ、これ柱じゃないの？
これは土台、土台は基礎の上に乗るんよで両端を大体は絶対押さえるからこれは下がりに使うんやなよっしゃ
なこれ何これ
うわーバッて書いてあるバンバッて
For the marking, I start from the sills, then the beams on the second floor perimeter, the beams parallel to the ridge, and the purlins. Then the vertical members, the first floor columns, second floor columns, and full height columns. I go through all the horizontals first, then all the verticals, one direction at a time. That's the usual way we carpenters mark things. Nowadays, we make it easier with aluminum measuring rods and even use ballpoint pens instead of sumisashi. If the surface is smooth and dry, honestly, a ballpoint works just fine. And if you're working with standardized lumber that's accurately milled and not warped, there's no need to mark a center line. Back in the day, if you had a long board milled, the width would be different on each end. So we'd mark a center line and take all our measurements from that. That's why marking the center line was essential. But now, you just don't need it anymore. This time, all the columns are the same length. So I line them up on a long sawhorse, then mark and cut them. It'll all be done at once. That wraps up the marking. Now I move on to the joinery cuts. This machine here is called an Arikama Hozotori. The name sounds a bit odd, but it handles most of the joint cutting. I haven't used it in years, so the oil has dried out and the shafts won't move. I'm trying to oil it, but it's so cold that the oil won't even come out.
Katai.
なんか筋トレしとるみたいな。
ほら、これ2本つけてほら。
There's no particular order for joinery cuts, so I start with whatever's in front. I'm starting by cutting the tenons for these columns. This machine's got power. It cuts straight through in one go, and it moves freely in all directions, so it's pretty easy to handle. It's my favorite cutting tool. For the column tenons, I cut large chamfers. Modern pre-cut tenons usually have small chamfers, so even if the mortise is the same size, getting the fit right can be tough. And of course, I write the joint numbers on each piece. That's standard practice. Since there will be a lintel, I make sure to notch the columns for that properly as well. I can cut the dovetail in one go with the same Arikama hosotori. But for the dovetail slot side, I switch to a dado router. This one can cut not only dados, but also dovetail slots since it can work at an angle. When this tool first came out and I used it for the first time, I was really amazed at how useful it is. It spins but still makes a clean diagonal cut. It's such a handy tool. It was just a small amount of timber, but now the joinery cuts are done. I head to the site to install the sill. As I mentioned at the beginning, only this section of the foundation will be added on, 3 meters square. That's the main part of this project. The whole thing started because the homeowner wanted a room for their household altar. First, I snap reference lines on the foundation. For additions, the key is lining everything up with the existing building. It has 120mm columns, so I'm using the same size. But the house is built on a meter module, so it's fairly spacious. The existing house has foundation vent openings, but for this addition, I'm only using sill gaskets with no openings. Of course, they're the kind that still let air through. And it turns out the total vent area is actually larger than with foundation vent openings. I've never calculated the airflow myself though. And this way, the foundation stays stronger because vent openings always seem to be where cracks start. I had them install the bolts in sets of 3. But when I went to drill the holes, I accidentally brought the old set of bits. Since they were dull and useless, I used an impact driver instead, which I'd never tried before. Turns out, if the bit is sharp, it actually works just fine. Some folks use concrete nails or screws to secure the foundation gaskets, but I don't think that's necessary. You can cut right through the gaskets with a handsaw. They feel soft, but they're made from reinforced plastic and can handle tons of pressure. Really handy material. Next, I strip off the metal siding where the addition will connect. I can't take it all the way up to the top, so I measure the height and cut it to match the new roof line. But cutting to the exact roof height from the start down to the millimeter is tricky. Since the sheet metal worker will make the final cut later, I leave some margin and just go at it roughly. For now, I'm just getting it peeled back. Pulling off metal siding is never fun. It's better than putting it on, but it's really scary because you can cut your hands real quick. As long as I don't touch the cut edge, I'm okay. But if I did, even with gloves on, I'd be bleeding in no time. The important thing is that once I grab it, I should never let go. And when I do let go, I let go fast. I think that's the best way to handle it. I can't exactly call in the sheet metal worker just for this section, so I'm glad I got through it. There will be a doorway on the right side where I peeled off the metal siding. Since I'll be removing the diagonal brace there, I reinforced the left side with structural panels. That makes this section a little stronger, and that's where it ends up. If I don't install these panels now, I won't be able to nail them once the addition goes up. So I'm putting them in ahead of time, just these two for now.
Oh, このままで入ってるやん。
のご安全に。
ご安全に酔っ払っちまうやんけ。
酔っ払うほど飲むなよ。
これ米塩やけど。
昔からこのセットなの？
本当言ったらこれ普通の米やろ。うん。千枚やな。順番は塩、米、酒と。
これで気を待っていくと。
はい、気を入れたまえ。
No matter how big or small the building is, we always purify it with sake before framing. It's part tradition, part good luck charm. A little insurance policy just in case.
でここで仏壇を作ると。
あ、仏間を清めたん。
うまくいきますように。はい。
はい。
ああ、美味しい。ひょっとしてあなたカメラマン？わし一人で。
いや、場合による。
のがこのいい。
I start by installing the columns. I said there are two of us, but my son jumps right behind the camera. So in the end, I'm putting up the columns by myself. If I rock them back and forth, the weight of the columns works them right down into place. With an addition or an extension like this, there are always a few spots where I have to measure the length on the spot, cut it, and fit it in.
ほら。
In the old days, it was standard practice to cut a mortise into the existing column and join the beam with a tenon, what we called sashikuchi. These days, we just double up a new column right next to the old one. That way, the old existing column doesn't carry any load. The new section handles all the weight. This addition connects to the existing building with a shed roof, so the beams parallel to the ridge, called keta, use the full length as is. I only measure and cut the beams perpendicular to the ridge. For any building, you always set the keta first, then the perpendicular beams. There aren't any intermediate beams or anything like that this time. After that, the purlins go on top. The keta are smaller in size because the columns support them at roughly 1 meter intervals. But a purlin spans about 3 meters without intermediate support. So the keta are 150 millimeters and the purlins are 180 millimeters. I would have liked to go 30 millimeters bigger on each, but anything heavier than this is tough to lift by hand. The load capacity is more than enough as it is. This piece is called a purlin, moya in Japanese, and it's what supports the rafters that hold up the roof. If it ran all the way down to the bottom, it would be called a keta instead. Now that the rough shape is together, I secure the hardware. If the hardware isn't properly secured, there will be a gap at the shoulder of the joint, and the plumb won't read true. So I pull everything tight with bolts, U-shaped clamps, and screws first, and then I check the building's lean. If I do it the other way around, check the plumb first and then find a slight gap at the tenon shoulders. Tightening them later will throw it off again. Now that the addition is framed properly, I check the plumb. I only need to check the 3 columns because the corner column was already checked for plumb when I first installed it. Most of the columns are cut to fit snugly, so they're pretty much right on. Even when I do adjust, it's only about 2 to 3 millimeters. But even that much needs to be corrected. Getting it right from the start is what matters.
気持ちこっち側。
気持ちこっち側やろ。ちょっと行くよ。
うん、ほんのちょっと。
来たやろ。
オッケー、バッチリ。
そうやね、高いな。それでどうや、ちょっと引っ張ってみるな。
OK そこ
はい、もんで
打って
もんで
打って
あんで。いくら簡単や、50円。
Now the addition is properly set in position, but one purlin needs to be embedded into the existing wall. I can't put a column under here because it would stick out into the room. Since there's no way around it, I secure it directly to the existing structure. There's a bump out in the existing building where I can't see what's inside. I'm attaching the purlin to that. Once I remove the wall a bit more than usual, I find a beam inside. So I firmly join and secure a post into that beam, set the purlin on top and secure it. Even with timber that weighs several tons, the bearing surface where it rests is usually just 15 millimeters. In this case, I've got about 30 millimeters of bearing for this post and beam. As the purlin sits on this 12 centimeter by 12 centimeter post, it's much sturdier than it looks. Now I install the rafters, which are the last structural piece. I temporarily screw rafters on both sides first, then measure the length and height from those rafters. It might seem like an inefficient on-site approach, but it's actually the most accurate method. It gives me both the correct height and the right length. This time, I'm using longer screws called tarukik, more of them than necessary. With an addition like this, the rafter overhang can't be decided ahead of time. So I measure and cut the ends after I secure all the rafters. I've already cut the fascia board to the same length as the keta. So I first install the fascia board, then the barge boards on the sides. Fascia boards cover the exposed rafter ends. Hanakakushi in Japanese, literally nose hiders. They align the rafter ends and reinforce the eave edge. Even under heavy snow, the load doesn't hit each rafter individually. It gets distributed so the rafter ends don't break. That's really the biggest advantage. Since this isn't a traditional Japanese style, soffit will be installed and it can't be fitted without a fascia board. Those are the reasons. Fascia goes on the front, barge board along the sloped sides. Even without a fascia board, you always need a barge board. It's there for rain and wind protection and as a decorative element for the house. Without it, the whole thing just looks unfinished. In traditional Japanese-style homes, they used to put a lot of care into the barge board. Some had multiple slopes on top for water drainage, and the more elaborate ones even had gegyo hanging from them. The most important part for a metal roof is installing a firm framing board above the fascia board and barge boards. Some builders take shortcuts and just extend plywood sheeting over the edge. You end up with the same looking finish, but when it rains and water gets in, it rots fast. If you use thick firm boards made from heartwood, the overhang won't rot. For the roof boards, the sheathing, I'm using 12mm cedar planks. Wood with more heartwood is better for this. On top of that, I installed 12mm waterproof plaster boards. It adds a bit of insulation and soundproofing. The roofer showed up right on time too. They laid the roofing felt, and with that, the roof is done. No more worrying about leaks. With the roof finished, I installed the wall sheathing. I only put up the structural shear wall panels for now. I installed the studs first, and then these panels go on in place of diagonal bracing. The problem with this addition is that there's no sliding glass door or large window, but only small windows. Since there's no way to get inside, I just installed the shear wall panels for now and called the framing done. With renovation dismantlement, there are always parts you need to keep. You have to protect those areas properly and keep the dust out. So protection comes first.
和室の輪郭はなぶらない。
あ、じゃあこの柱とかもこのままってこと？
This room is right next to the addition. It's an 11 square meter Japanese style room with an oshiire and a tokonoma. I'll be making a passageway that runs through the tokonoma area. We're not doing a full renovation on this room, but we'll keep the columns, kamoi, and crown molding, replacing the wallpaper in between, and renovating the ceiling, tokonoma, and oshiire. With renovation work, you can't just tear things out and rebuild. That doesn't work. Whether it's the right side or the left, you plan it out properly and take it all down in one go. That's the basic approach. If I dismantle from the addition side, the framing will be fully exposed. If I try to break through from the front, where the drywall is, it's wallpapered, so I won't be able to tell where the screws are. So I work from the frame on the addition side. That said, there's a diagonal brace in this section too. Since I'm cutting right through the diagonal brace to take out the board like this, I've already installed 2 sheets of structural sheathing on the adjacent 1.8 meter wall next to it. Even with one diagonal brace removed, those 2 sheets of sheathing keep things plenty strong. I think it might even be a bit stronger than before. With all the earthquakes lately, you really can't afford to make things weaker than the original. Back in our day, 30-40 years ago, we used to put fire-resistant boards on the exterior walls instead of structural sheathing. When you put up those boards and everything looked clean, it looked nice. But honestly, I don't think they did much structurally.
かんだんてな。なんか混んで通れるほら。
うまいこと言ったやん。
In the video, it looks like the whole 1 meter wall just folded right over in one go, like it went perfectly. But there are furring strips, so I have to separate the wood from the fire-resistant boards. Even if the dismantlement itself is fast, I have to sort and separate the wood and boards. Otherwise, it just ends up taking more time. Now we can finally move between the new addition and the existing part of the house. For a few days, I had part of the sheathing removed. Every night, I'd screw it back in place before leaving, and then every morning, I'd open it up again to get in. This is so much easier. Next, I take apart the oshiire on the side. Oshiire is built neatly with veneer sheets, but if you just work backward through the steps, it comes apart easily. One thing I noticed while taking things apart, this house is about 30 years old, and nails and screws are really mixed together throughout. Back in those days, you'd use screws only where you really needed a solid hold, and nails for everything else. And maybe people were a bit hesitant about using screws. Even ledger boards that support joists were nailed. It's about half and half on this job. Back then, nails and screws were counted as part of the carpenter's labor costs. Screws were pretty expensive when they first came out, so people used them sparingly. I remember that too. Depending on the task, nails are faster, and if you worry the screw might snap or break, you'd reach for a nail instead back in those days. These days, screws are thick, long, and tough, much harder to break. So now, it's pretty much 100% screws for interior joinery work. Now I'm peeling off the ceiling called Mesukashi Tenjo. It'd be easy if I were removing the crown molding too, but I'm keeping it and just removing the ceiling panels. The middle section comes apart fast, but all the nails driven into the crown molding stay behind. The ceiling itself comes down quickly, but cleaning up those leftover nails is a real pain. I'm already dreading it a little. Next, I remove the tokonoma column, tokobashira. You might think removing this one column weakens the structure, but not at all. The flat beam above it is 330 millimeters and is supported well enough without this column. There's no second floor column sitting above it either. This column wasn't set during framing. It was added later during interior joinery work, screwed into place. It looks like a fine piece of ebony, all jet black, but it's actually just laminated wood, the ebony style that was really popular back then. In this case, even the floorboard has that same dark finish, a full black tokonoma set.
ャップポンと入れたところまで
I always think this, but taking things apart is easy. You don't have to think about anything. Just take things apart one piece at a time. It'd be so exciting if I could do interior work at this speed. I take apart the oshi-ire on the other side of the room the same way. As you can see, this one has many diagonal braces too. This 1 meter section is going to become the doorway from this room out to the entryway hall. It'll be a straight shot from the entryway all the way through to the household altar room. There'll be an opening into the entryway hall. I'm not tearing apart the entire entryway hall, just cutting an opening for the doorway. So I carefully remove the baseboard to avoid any damage, then take out the wall in the 1 meter doorway section. This section also has diagonal bracing. I have no choice but to cut and remove it. The oshi-ire next to it has another 1.8 meter wall, just like before, so I plan to attach structural sheathing there. I installed structural sheathing on this 1.8 meter wall, but it's pretty heavy. With the oshi-ire's kamoi still in place, getting it in there was a real struggle. But once it's on, it gives you peace of mind. This time, I'm working on the floor of the newly added section. When building an addition like this, you have to match the floor height to the existing room.
な、ここ高いやろ。両端は良かったんや、確か。ほら。
あ、こんだけ買ったんかったんするん。
ちょっと高いね、これな。こんなんはもう直しようがないんで、逆にここで合わそうかな。これでネガテンってことや。で、コンパレが4部やけん、まあまあ。
If the room is traditional Japanese style, lining up the kamoi height is tricky. But these days, like in this room, they just lay down tatami to get that Japanese look. So we no longer strictly match the kamoi or shiki heights to the old building. In the newly added section, I just adjust the floor beam height, and that takes care of matching the floor height. So the building is set up so that you can decide the floor height later on. Since the floor height gets decided later, the beams are fine, but I obviously can't run joists across the top of the sill or anything like that. For the newly added floor section, I installed the ledger boards that support the joists. I'm installing them beforehand, but as long as the construction doesn't cause the ledger boards to sag, it's actually fine to install them later. If the ledger boards are secured firmly, the beam height can be adjusted flexibly. I don't have to force the new sill to line up with the bottom of the joists. The beams are roughly cut to length, but since I don't know the exact height yet, I mark the line based on the spot and notch them out. In the addition, I'm running 2 beams across the 2300 mm span, so the spacing is tighter than usual. That makes the floor really sturdy. Just one spot catches on the old sill, so I notch out that part of the beam and fit it in. The way we determine the height of the beams, joists, and floor has switched since the old days. 40 years ago, Japanese-style rooms were more common, so we used them as the baseline. For Japanese-style room floors, we laid the joist directly on top of the sill. We used that as the reference point and framed the hallway and modern-style rooms from there. Since tatami is typically 55 mm thick, the top of the Japanese-style room's floor frame was set lower than in the hallway and modern-style rooms, so the floor frames weren't all set to the same level across rooms. These days, most houses barely have one Japanese-style room, so the baseline has shifted to modern-style rooms. Back then, the floor frame in Japanese-style rooms sat lower, but with tatami on top, the finished floor ended up 30 to 35 millimeters higher than the hallway at the doorway. But these days, it's accessible. Any step can only be up to 5 millimeters. Honestly, for renovations, that 30 to 36 millimeter step actually made things a bit easier. Even with 15 millimeter thick flooring, you could still lay a subfloor underneath. The step gave you some flexibility. But now, the modern style room is used for the baseline height, and the Japanese style room's floor under the tatami drops down from there. This room is going to be a tatami room, and I'm putting in insulation. Back in the day, we rarely put insulation under a Japanese-style room. There are many kinds of tatami mats, from 15 millimeters to 55 millimeters thick. If you're laying 55 millimeter tatami, there's probably 40 to 45 millimeters of styrofoam insulation already in it. So the insulation in the tatami itself works better than the floor insulation I'm putting in now. That's why we didn't usually insulate tatami rooms. Even in this house, there was 25 millimeters of old insulation under the old tatami. We figured we might as well put insulation in here too, so that's what I'm doing. After the insulation goes in, I lay hinoki cypress structural plywood under the tatami. In the old days, we pretty much always laid 15 millimeter thick cedar planks. They shrank and created gaps over time, and people said the air coming up through the gaps was good for tatami and kept the moisture out. But when the tatami shrank and created gaps, wind would come up through them. So we'd lay down newspaper to block the draft. It's always better to have it laid tight. Now that the floor is down, I'll move on to putting in the wall insulation. For the wall insulation, I'm using thick fiberglass. Even with fiberglass, having this much thickness is great. It's a bit itchy and makes you kind of want to scratch, but insulation fits more snugly when it's not wrapped in plastic. In this case, the spacing is 1 meter. I use the widest insulation available to fit it in. As long as I pack it in tight, the insulation will do its job. This time, I'm not doing air sealing. Even if I seal just the addition, it won't really do much because air sealing works when the whole house is wrapped up tight. Instead, I've left the attic open here to let air move through. That's actually better for the house.
ちょっと真ん中で潜っとったよな。気持ちな。まあまあ。上が5、6。で、ここでちょっとちゃうんや。7、3なんやんけ。3ミリ違うだけね。ここ全然悪ない。ここも悪ない。ただこれがちょっと一部下がってこれが正解なんやろな。きっと73やねえか。73。
This time, I'm working on the section between the new addition and the original 6 tatami mat room. There used to be a 2-meter oshiire and a 1-meter tokonoma here. I'm going to frame the floor and install the subfloor in this section. The floor for the 6 tatami mat room will remain as is. So as long as the height isn't way off, I'll set the shiki at pretty much the existing height. There was talk of laying tatami on this 1.5 tatami mat section. But since the homeowner wanted to put a gas heater and a TV here, a wood floor seemed like the better choice, and we decided to go with flooring. It becomes hinoki cypress flooring from the inside of the column. I run a shiki where the two rooms meet, and that gives the clean break. This house runs on a meter grid. So 3 grids means 3 meters, and this shiki is also 3 meters. These products come pre-cut at 4 meters or 3 meters, so that's cutting it pretty close makes me a little nervous. There's a dado on the column that was used for the old shiki. I'm going to use that on one side and cut a new dado on the opposite side to install. You actually don't need to cut a dado in a case like this. You can just set the height and screw it down. But since the dado is already there, I'm going to use it for the new shiki.
Oh. するの？
無理ないの。
The dado will be plugged, so I'm using the same hinoki cypress to make the plug. It's ideal to use the heartwood portion. A 3-meter shiki is the easiest length to set in place. Anything longer is heavy, and anything shorter needs too much of an angle to fit. A 3-meter piece is the easiest to work with. I cut a tongue on one side and a dado on the other, then drive in a plug. That's the traditional way to install a shiki. I'm installing the 1-meter shiki on the opposite side of the room the same way, but this one I'll butt joint and screw down. That's because the left end needs to align perfectly with the tatami border strip. There's no room for error. It's just a 1-meter shiki, but if I don't set it carefully, it won't line up right. Next, I frame the floor. Just like the floor in the new addition, I install the ledger boards and run the 1-meter long joists. Since the insulation is also 1 meter, the joists catch the insulation on both sides firmly, preventing it from falling through. On top of that, I'll be laying 12mm plywood as the subfloor underneath the flooring. For the floor frame, I run the 1-meter long joists, just like in the addition. Basically, I run them in the shorter direction. That way, the insulation fits snugly between the joists, exactly as it should. On top of that, I lay the plywood panels as the subfloor under the flooring. Now that the subfloor is done, it's a lot easier to walk between this room and the addition.
ここだけもう化粧になるっちゅうわけやな。
化粧の柱が4本立つみたいな感じの。
仕上がりは4本立ってるように見えるやろな。
Next, I move on to the kamoi and shiki on the front of the addition. In the addition, there's a household altar section in the middle and oshiire on either side, so it's laid out as 3 bays. There are 2 clean exposed columns only in the middle, and on both sides, I'll set exposed half columns. Once everything's finished, it'll look just like there's a full column there. So there's really no need to add a full column at all.
もうあと15上がればいいんや。
When setting half columns in afterward like this, you do the prep work ahead of time, cutting the dados for the kamoi, crown moldings, and shiki. It's a lot easier to do that work on the workbench than to cut each groove one by one once they're standing. Anything you can do in a more comfortable position is better. Setting these 45mm half columns also makes the finishing on the walls on both sides look better. The wall stopper sits slightly proud of the wall cleanly, and you can drive in as many screws as you want from the hidden side. Then, when I set the kamoy in the middle, I'll run a string line and use that to set the height. The household altar section comes in the middle with oshi-ire on both sides. Normally, all the kamoy in a Japanese-style room run at the same height, so all three line up straight across. But since this is a simple Japanese-style room with tatami and exposed columns in front, I add a little variation by raising the middle household altar bay. When you hear raise, you might be thinking of a tokonoma, but here the altar will have steps in the middle, so I also slightly raise the kamoy above it. I think it keeps the balance and looks better. Next, I install three 1-meter shiki at the bottom. The tatami is 55mm thick, but these shiki are set 55mm plus 15mm higher, about the thickness of a furring strip. The lower cabinet and the oshi-ire on both sides will have hinged doors, so having the shiki at the same height as the tatami just isn't interesting. With or without a carpet, the doors might catch and scrape. Since it's not really a walking path, I just go ahead and raise it 15mm. Lining up all three at that height looks clean. When you're setting the shiki in, dabbing on a little water makes it harder to scratch the wood. Of all the shiki, a 1-meter one is the trickiest to install. The columns scratch easily because you have to step it in hard from above. There's also a method where you slide it in from the open side, but you're basically stepping it in from above. So this time, I cut a dado on both sides of the shiki and drive plugs into all 6 dado spots. Cutting the dados and plugging them holds firmly and looks clean. It can be a bit of a hassle, but I think this gives the cleanest fit. For even finer work, you stop the dado 15mm back from the front face of the column. That way, the dado won't be visible from the front and you get a clean finish. But the tatami covers it anyway, so I don't think that level of detail is necessary here. Next, I installed the window jamb extensions. Since I used hinoki cypress for the columns and half columns out front, I also use it here. This is a bit thicker solid wood. The work is just a butt joint, but if I drive in 3 long screws and the wood is properly dried, it pretty much never creates a gap. Having about 33 millimeters of thickness actually gives it a more settled, solid look.
なんかパッと見杉にも見えるんやけど。
これら見るとな。
This time, I'm laying 15mm Hinoki cypress floorboards over the subfloor from last time. The span is exactly 3 meters. Floorboards come in 3 lengths, 2 meters, 3 meters, and 4 meters. I had 1 bundle of 3-meter boards left over, so the timing worked out perfectly. Even with 4-meter boards for a 3-meter span, you'd always end up with waste. A bundle covers about 3.3 square meters, and 3-meter boards give you 1 extra piece per bundle compared to 4-meter ones. I'm glad it worked out perfectly for this area.
なんでもんどん。
いやほら猫こねするやろ。
猫？
猫。いるかな。
Now, I apply glue and fasten with 4mm staples. For 15mm thick boards, stapling is the only option. If these were 30mm joistless floorboards, I'd use screws and get a really solid hold. But with these boards, I can run the full length in one piece. No seams or joints in between, and it looks clean. Just because you use glue doesn't mean you'll completely eliminate floor squeaks. It can squeak whether you glue it or not. Solid wood is just tricky that way. That said, gluing does help resist warping, so it's worth doing. Originally, this flooring section was planned to have tatami laid down to make a 7.5 tatami mat room. But since the owner is planning to put a TV, a heater, and possibly furniture here, the decision was made to use solid wood flooring instead. This way, the tatami area stays at a clean 6 mats. 7.5 mats would have been a bit of an unusual layout. Thinking about how the space will actually be used, solid wood flooring makes the most sense. The last row ended up a little narrow, but if I had distributed that difference across the whole floor, the board next to the shiki in the middle of the room would have ended up 3 centimeters narrower. That would have looked off, so I let the adjustment happen at the edge near the doorway instead. The narrower the board, the harder it is to fit. But since both the shiki and the flooring are hinoki cypress, even a slightly narrow board still looks clean. The floor is done. Next, I install a daiwa, similar to a kamoi but with a different function. The wallpaper in this room will be replaced, but we're keeping the existing crown molding in place. That means if I remove this crown molding running across the middle of the room, there's no clean way to end the remaining crown molding. So I leave the existing crown molding as is and add this new exposed daiwa directly below it. that new piece will look clean and finished on its own, while also letting the original crown molding join neatly. However, the ceiling won't be unified as one continuous surface. There will be a break here. But the floor changes to solid wood from this line and the ceiling wallpaper won't change. So the break at the daiwa reads as a design detail, and I think that works just fine.
なんで手で頑張るの？
痛い
At the boundary between the new threshold and daiwa, I installed trim to create a clean break between the covered column wall okabe and the exposed column wall shinkabe sections. I can't just drive fasteners straight through the face here, so I start by tacking it in from the okabe side with finished nails, then finish with screws driven in at an angle for a solid hold. This piece is a bit large, but since the okabe wall frame will project forward from the newly added section, I need to account for the thickness of the furring strips, so the larger piece is the right call. This house uses a wider metric module, not a typical shaku module. So even after converting to okabe, where the wall frame projects forward, you can still get a wider opening, which is great. Next, I work on the kamoyan side jamb for the addition entryway. This opening will have a top-hung sliding door. Since I can't run the door over the tatami side, I'll route it over the solid wood floor section in the middle. There's no threshold or floor track. It just floats above the floor. It's a simple door jamb with a right angle setup. Just two pieces, the top kamoi and one vertical jamb on the side. If I framed it three ways, I'd end up with a vertical jamb sticking out in the middle of the wall. Either way, you need to leave clearance for the door to slide, but without that extra jamb, you can push furniture closer to the door and the wall runs straight and clean right to the corner of the opening, which looks great.
あ、折れた。折れた。あ、これどうです。
そんな先っちょもげるもんの。
最後にガッとこう締めるのって。
When installing a door frame for a top-hung door with just two pieces like this, it may sound simple because there are only a few parts. But actually, a three-sided or four-sided frame is much easier to fasten. That's because the mullion has to be perfectly plumb, and with a top-hung door, the kamoi has to be both level and plumb as well. If the pieces are bowed or twisted, it's even worse. It's basic stuff, but checking plumb and level on every piece as you go, that's what matters. With fewer pieces, each one is completely free, not locked into a pre-assembled frame, and that's what makes it harder to install. The center mullion will also land on the outside face of the column. So instead, I attach backing to the mullion itself, then fasten that backing to the face of the column. Of course, the column has a slight lean to it, so I adjust as I go to make sure the mullion ends up plumb. Whether it's a renovation or new construction, plumb and level are essential when building a door frame to fit right.
乗せれば乗せるほどしっかりするしな。揺れることはないわな。
Let's work on the ceiling. Before setting up the ceiling framing, I retightened the hardware. After 30 years, these nuts have worked themselves pretty loose. Some of them have turned 3 full rotations. I can't get to every single one, but I tighten everything within reach. This is the kind of thing you can only do during a renovation, so it's worth the effort. The ceiling framing is for drywall. The installation is the same as usual, but the one big difference is that the existing crown molding is still in place, so I'll be installing the drywall above the existing crown molding. Normally, you put up the drywall first and then the crown molding. Here, the old crown molding is already there, and I'm fitting 9mm board up against it. Since it'll get wallpapered over, a gap of just under 1mm is acceptable. I need to keep the boards within that range as I go. For the framing, I start by running the perimeter as usual. When securing the 4 sides, I don't string a line or snap a chalk line. The existing crown molding isn't perfectly level, but the board fits between the frame and the molding. Where the column spacing is wide, I set a vertical support into the dozashi in the middle, so the board slides in smoothly. I focus on getting that perimeter set clean. After that, the framing is the same as usual. I run the square lumber, called nobuchi, in one direction at 300mm spacing. Some carpenters like to run thin 15mm furring strips on top of the nobuchi, but personally, I prefer to just work with the nobuchi alone. The drywall screws bite well and the whole thing ends up solid. Regardless of the ceiling type, the ceiling is suspended at 1 meter intervals. I use offcuts of Nobuchi for the struts. First, I screw the strut to check the height. These days, I only give it a slight crown of about 3 to 4 millimeters at the center of the ceiling. Back in the day, we'd crown it more. But especially with the existing crown molding still in place, as it is here, too much crown opens up a gap. So I keep it to 3 or 4 millimeters, then nail it off with a regular nail gun for a solid hold. Screws have gotten a lot better lately, so snapping isn't really a concern anymore. But iron nails just give me peace of mind. Next, I put in the insulation. There was no insulation above the original ceiling. When there's a second floor above, insulation usually isn't added. But since we're renovating, it makes sense to put it in. It's definitely better than leaving it out. I make sure to get it in properly. Now I move on to boarding the ceiling. The drywall is 9 millimeters, so a utility knife is more than enough. No need for a circular saw. Even a rough cut works fine since the edge tucks under the crown molding. I keep the cut edges toward the wall so that the clean face always ends up facing the room. The one challenging part is that this house is built on a metric module. As the boards use a typical shaku module, which is shorter, 1.5 boards don't quite reach. But getting longer metric module boards would be a hassle, so I just use standard boards. I apply glue at the seams and board it up the usual way. I'm staggering the boards at 1 meter intervals. Some wallpaper installers prefer aligned seams because even if something goes wrong, it shows up as one clean straight line. With staggered seams, that same issue shows up offset by 1 meter. But as long as the seams don't cause any problems, either way works fine. Installing the boards on the edge might look tricky, but it's actually pretty easy. I just slide it deep to one side, then ease it back into place. It's a simple slide and ease technique. I board the ceiling of the flooring section the same way. Because I added a daiwa below the crown molding, the two ceilings can't be connected directly. But since the floor clearly changes under this daiwa, having a break at the ceiling feels natural. Next, I work on the wall between the two rooms. It's 1 meter wide by 3 meters tall. The building isn't severely out of plumb, but for some reason, the original studs don't match the columns in size, and furring strips were added on top, leaving the wall uneven. Running new furring strips straight fixes that. A 2 to 3 millimeter lean isn't a problem. Only this section will end up being okabe, where the wall covers the columns. But with a TV or a piece of furniture there, I think it'll look just right. I secure the crown molding after the wall is up here. It lines up cleanly with the bottom edge of the daiwa and blends right in with the rest of the room. I use hinoki cypress for the baseboard to match the floor. I'm working on the altar section and the oshi-ire. This renovation actually started because the owner wanted to add a household altar room. So this is really the main event of the whole job, though it's not a large space. The front is divided into 3 bays, with the altar section in the middle and the oshi-ire on the sides. I start from the floor.
No.
I work on the floors in all 3 areas at once, the altar section and both oshi-ire. I'm using 30mm joistless floorboards, which don't need joists underneath if the span is 1 meter. But this time, I'm putting joists in anyway. Since I want to add insulation, I set the joists at 300mm intervals, which makes it much easier to fit. So I secure joists at that pitch, fit the insulation between them, and then lay the 30mm joistless floorboards on top. For a 1 meter span without joists, you'd normally run the floorboards with the end grain facing the threshold. But right now, I'm laying them parallel to the threshold. It looks a lot cleaner this way. The depth is shorter, so if I run the end grain along the depth, the boards are short and it's easier to install. But with the end grain against the threshold, if the boards swell or warp over time, the end grain starts to peek out from the threshold. So I run it parallel instead. That's the secret to keeping it looking clean. Now that the floor is down, I move on to the altar section. It's in the middle and the oshi-ire are on both sides. I build the altar section first because I want to reach in from behind to do all the work. If I finish the oshi-ire first, I won't be able to do that. That's why the altar section comes first. I frame the partition, then move on to the overhead work. Anything you can do later, you do first. That's why the ceiling comes first. I'm using M-cloth panels on the altar section. That's because this is a fully built-in altar, not a freestanding one. It gets 3 shelf tiers, and having M-cloth on the walls makes it much easier to secure support or backing because it holds the screws well. So I surround the section with M-cloth and build a solid, sturdy wall. Now I make the parts for the 3 built-in altar tiers in the space. The term is a bit confusing, but the household altar space is called butsuma, and the altar unit placed there is called butsudan in Japanese. This time, I'm building it in 3 tiers like a display stand. The bottom will become a lower cabinet as is traditional. I use 3 wide solid boards for the shelves plus 2 risers. 5 pieces of solid, knot-free hinoki cypress in total. That's what I'm working with.
でもこれ350円。この仕方が多いと思ったらここをこんだけ落としてこっちから350。
I cut a groove on the shelf board where the riser will slide in. Thick risers are a must because thin ones are bound to warp. I keep them 30 to 33 millimeters thick so that they won't warp or go out of shape. The top board is wide, so I make it thicker on purpose. But only on the front, I keep it at 33 millimeters so that everything lines up. It takes a little extra work, but when it's finished, all the shelves look even and clean.
まあ削り入るか。
I've run the shelf boards through the super surfacer, but I make sure to hand plane them at the site for the final finish. When I first measured the size of the parts, I drew a full-scale drawing on a 1-meter plywood panel. Now, I draw it directly on the actual wall where everything will sit and fit it there.
When the
plank is finished this cleanly, using the miter saw can leave a faint mark from the blade cover. So I tape the cover so that it won't touch the wood. I do it carefully at my own risk in situations like this. First is the bottom tier, the shelf board that becomes the top of the lower cabinet. The cabinet has hinged doors, not sliding doors, so there's no groove. That means I can notch the column and slide the shelf in from behind. I hold a planed off cut against the column, trace it, and cut the dado. I cut it for a snug fit, then I'll tap down the corners and set it in. The work is simple, just cutting the dado to match the thickness of the plank and sliding it in. But getting the length exactly right is the fussier part. Even in a 1 meter square space like this, something cut square doesn't always sit square. This time, I've decided to do this one without shelf trim. The trim makes the work much easier, but it leaves the trim's end grain visible when it's finished. I make sure to firmly attach the board on all 3 sides. I apply glue to the end grain of the shelf boards just in case to prevent cracking, then set them in place. It's a stop dado joint, sliding in from the back with only the front corner notched 15 millimeters. I haven't worked on the oshi-ire on both sides yet, so I can fasten the shelf from the sides. I've lined up the furring strips to match the shelves, so by screwing them from the sides, it holds firmly. For the second and third tiers, I fasten supports around the walls and set the shelf boards on top. Someone in the comments taught me a trick back when I did the staircase. Drive the screw until it sticks out just 3 millimeters. Touch the support into position, then drive it home. They said it sets cleanly and won't slip, even with glue. I'm doing it that way, and it really makes sense. For the second and third tiers, if you cut the length right and set them on the supports, you can screw them from below. It'll be set into place cleanly.
あーとねホック電気
うつ伏せでも
なんでよこんな歩いて潜れるか俺はあれワイの体が邪魔や中入ってまえばええや頭ってこれ急すんだよね
The risers are the tricky part. Getting both the risers and the shelf boards to align firmly to length is actually trickier than joining them. There's not much room to move around in a tight space. I use glue and screws together and fasten everything solid so that nothing moves.
Oh, これこっからやと
Watching the video, it probably looks like I'm flailing around in a tiny space. But once you're inside and turn this way, there's actually quite a bit of room. I could even do the top part sitting down. Now the 3 altar tiers in the altar room are done. Next up are the oshi-ire on both sides. I run cedar planks horizontally.
Mm.
出てきたって
The planks are 10 millimeters thick with tongue and groove edges. I fasten them directly to the wall studs. I only frame the corners because if you don't, the seams run straight across and bugs can travel right through the gaps. Cedar planks really are nice for an oshi-ire. They absorb moisture and feel settled. Though I suppose feeling settled doesn't really matter inside an oshi-ire. Of course, I run cedar planks on the ceiling too. I build the pillow shelf at about eye level. Nobody actually puts pillows on it these days, but this half-depth shelf has always been called the pillow shelf. It's really for towels and boxes. In the middle, I add a shelf for futons. We call it chudan, literally the middle shelf in Japanese. Now the standard oshi-ire with a middle shelf and pillow shelf in a 1 meter square are done. How did you like the compilation? This addition and renovation took 2 months over the winter and it's finally complete. It all started because the owner wanted a custom household altar and a dedicated room for it. The room is 9.9 square meters. It's newly added, so basically new construction. I also renovated the 6th tatami room next door, connecting it all the way to the entryway. Now guests can walk straight in through here. That was the main focus of this renovation. Instead of placing a freestanding altar in this section, we've designed it to hold a Buddha statue up top, flowers and incense below, and a table in front for praying. It's a custom-built altar space. Now, the addition and renovation are complete. Thanks for watching.